Welcome in, John Dickinson, KNBR, the sports leader. It's Just Dubs, the Just Dubs podcast, the debut edition here for the sports leader, and going to be talking all things Golden State Warriors basketball here as the season is underway. And much like our Dubs OT show, which airs following each and every game here on KNBR, the sports leader, we're going to be talking all things Warriors basketball. Like to keep the show as interactive as possible. It's going to be on YouTube. It's going to be available come January on Saturday mornings on the radio. And so this is going to be kind of a multifaceted platform for the Just Dubs podcast and Saturday show that we're really looking forward to. An extension of Dubs OT, again, after each and every game, and just getting into more depth about Golden State Warriors basketball. It's a pleasure to be joined by the great Greg Silver, getting some mic time here, getting some FaceTime here for those on YouTube. And he's going to be joining me for each and every one of these podcasts, and he's been on the show that we do after the games, and he's going to be a major part of the Saturday show once it airs in January. So, Greg, first of all, I just want to welcome you in and just say it's been a pleasure working with you here through these last 6 games since I came over to KNBR, and I think we're doing big things in our Warriors coverage and just continuing to make things bigger and bigger. And I'm glad to have you a part of the team, and glad to be a part of the team that you had already been a part of.
Well, JD, it's good to see you as well. We've spent a lot of time working together, talking together, and I'm glad that we're finally getting to do this. And we've lived through a lot with the Warriors in the recent weeks. It's felt like an eternity, even though it's been about 6 Dubs OT shows. So to be able to add another show and get to do things on Saturday and a little different, where we can do more of a look at the week, kind of recap sentiment to the show, as opposed to not knowing exactly what we're going to do because we're going live minutes after the final tip. I'm just thrilled to get some variety. And what a time in Warriors history to be starting this, huh?
Yeah, it really is. Might be the beginning of the end, or maybe we're farther along than people want to admit as far as toward the end. But as we sit here and record this, and again, no holds barred. This is going to be at least a weekly podcast. It's going to be at least a weekly show come January on the Sports Leader. But we're going to bust these out really whenever we see fit. If something breaks and it's on a night where there isn't a game, then we're going to jump on and have the ability to go live, to have the ability to crank something out in emergency format to get the people all of the great Warriors content that they crave. So it's going to be multifaceted, and it's really just a whole lot of freedom to do whatever we want. I know I'm going to be heading to a lot of Warriors practices once we hit January and kind of get through the holiday season, as things start to really gear up and the NBA season becomes in more full focus. So we'll have opportunities for player and coach interviews, which is going to be just tremendous. And, for this podcast, wanted to keep it as simple as possible, really, just based on the fact that we've got a whole season, at least a quarter of a season to kind of react to. And yeah, there's been a lot just in the 3 weeks, basically, that we've been working together, I guess closer to 2, really. But so, I mean, this team's 10-14 as we kind of dive right into it. 10-14. They're struggling on the road now after a great start away from Chase Center. Draymond Green is out. There's lineup changes already being made. And just kind of a cloak of uncertainty, Greg, surrounding this team as we dive full bore into our new and improved Warriors coverage here on the Sports Leader.
I mean, yeah, what's crazy about this is it feels like it's been 2 separate lifetimes, and we're, like you said, a quarter through the season. Those first 9 games, they went 6-3. I know everyone mentions the 6-2 start, but I'm actually going to tack on that loss in Denver to the good vibes kind of part of it, because they were without Draymond Green that time.
It was a good loss.
That was for a personal
it was a rare
rebound.
good loss.
It was a good loss. It's a really good loss. Came down to a Steph Curry left-handed floater that didn't quite go, that would have probably sent the game to overtime. And so Since then, it's been a whole lot of struggle, a whole lot of uphill battling. The starters have not had the kind of effectiveness that we've seen ever, even last year, which was kind of talked about as the year we don't ever go back to and talk about and refer to, and we're moved past that. Well, the starters were pretty good. It was the bench that was having problems, and now it's the second unit that's injecting life into a team that is digging these big holes for themselves because the starters are not producing. And it's nice to see some of these young guys like Jonathan Kuminga and Moses Moody and Brandon Pajemski have really nice starts to the season. But it's tough to see the inconsistencies of an aging Klay Thompson who had a good game last night with his 30 points, finally kind of popped off in LA. But then you have Andrew Wiggins, who hasn't had an injury history and was an all-star starter 2 seasons ago and a great player throughout the 2022 playoffs. And I don't really know what's happened to him. I don't think anyone really has a good answer for it.
No, and it really is a case of how did we get here, right? And you mentioned the 6-2, and I think it's fair to group in the Denver game as far as the open to the season and the 6-3 start overall. And look, things were going not completely according to plan, but I think the baseline for what the Warriors believed that their team would be coming into this season was there in the first 9 games. And it was there even though Klay Thompson and Andrew Wiggins were showing early signs of having difficult seasons, even though Draymond Green had missed a couple of games due to the ankle injury that he sustained right before training camp and the one game against the Nuggets due to the personal reasons. So all of that being said, the Warriors had a revamped rotation. They had a belief that Chris Paul was going to be coming off the bench and that they knew Steph Curry, Klay Thompson, Andrew Wiggins, Draymond Green, and Kevon Looney were going to be as the 5-man group that was among the best or the best statistically in the NBA a year ago. They felt they had that as a foundation. They had Chris Paul anchoring a bench that was also going to be adding Dario Saric with Gary Payton II to really come up with a formidable top 8. And then you pepper in Jonathan Kuminga and Moses Moody, 9 and 10, with Brandon Pajemski and maybe Trace Jackson Davis waiting in the wings as the 11th and 12th men that we're going to get opportunities, but we're going to get opportunities as other players maybe needed a break or, found themselves on the injury report. But so there was an order to what I think the Warriors were trying to do in the first 8-9 games of the season. Everything really started to go awry when Draymond Green, and it's tough to make him the focal point of this whole thing off the jump because, the overarching theme, Greg, has been, it's been Draymond, Klay Thompson, and Andrew Wiggins in their own ways, and I think even Kevon Looney a little bit, just not playing up to the level that the Warriors were intending on demanding that they play if this team was going to be the best version of themselves. So Wiggins and Klay were kind of already down the road of not being what they needed to be and certainly not what they'd been the last couple of years. But then Draymond and Donovan Mitchell, this thing really coming off of that road trip with Draymond getting ejected from that game, the Warriors lose. They end up losing to Minnesota. And then all hell breaks loose. As Steph Curry goes down, all hell breaks loose in the game where Draymond and Rudy Gobert mix it up, Jaden McDaniels and Klay Thompson mix it up. The Warriors were surviving, Greg, up until that point. Some struggles, a couple of back-to-back bad games from Klay. He was frustrated. That led to the incident with Jaden McDaniels, which led to the second incident in a matter of days with Draymond Green. Steph Curry suddenly was injured. Andrew Wiggins was nowhere to be found. And this thing just flipped fast, but it really flipped that weekend that they played Cleveland and Minnesota, and then with that next Minnesota game that the Warriors didn't win during the melee. And they've been fighting an uphill climb really for the last 5-6 weeks.
Well, we are going to have a lot of fun with numbers as the year goes along, and perhaps might not always be so fun with the way things are trending, but I want to have some fun with words for a second here, because leading up to the season, I went on a couple of shows, talked with a lot of other fans and media members, and one of the things that I kept mentioning is that you would hear the same words over and over about cohesion, connectivity, high IQ basketball. I know that's not one word, a little Charles Barkley there for me, but uh, now there's one word that's really sticking out, and you just alluded to it in that very quick downfall, which is fragility. This building is very fragile. We've seen Klay Thompson have some iffy exchanges with reporters about questions of if he's going to get benched. Draymond Green is not available. And again, I don't want to make it the focal point, like you just said, but what's really tough about this Draymond thing is he is such a unique player, not just to the Warriors play style, but to the modern NBA. So for a team that's aging and has little margin of error, for him to not be out there for extended stretches of time over things that he could theoretically control and actions that take place in other games, that's a major blow to the team because they last night couldn't buy a stop against the Clippers in a game where all in all, they didn't play terrible.
Well, it's been different. It's been a lot of different things. There's been a few things that have been the same. I think the one thing that the Warriors were doing pretty well through the first 9 games, they weren't fouling as much and they weren't turning the ball over as much. And then everything kind of snowballed right in that mid-November little stretch where Draymond gets ejected. Klay had a couple of bad games, which I think just the frustration mounted. And then Draymond wound up suspended. Steph Curry winds up out due to injury for a couple of games. And then all of a sudden, the defense is horrendous without Draymond Green, which I think does not bode well for this team right now, as they are going to play an indefinite amount of games without Draymond Green. And so it really is, there's just a lot of different things that continue to go wrong in many different ways for the Warriors. And they needed everything to be on schedule, I feel like, this year for them to be at their best. And it started off pretty well on schedule. And then it went completely off the rails. And now I think it's gone off the rails more than anybody could have possibly expected, because the reality is, Greg, and I don't know what your take is on it, but this feels to me an awful lot like last year. And, both with the record, and I went back and looked, the latest point that the Warriors were 3 games under 500. They were 4 games under 500 last year when they were 3-7. That was their low point. And the only time all year that they were 4 under 500 was when they were 3-7. They were, and I had it here, and let me dig it up real quick. I think I still have it on my screen from earlier. Yeah, I was looking at, they were right. It was right around this time when Steph and Curry went down in Indiana. In fact, I think it was a year ago yesterday, actually, that Steph Curry went down in Indiana and was going to miss some time. They were 15-18 on December 21st. They had just gotten blown out at the end of that road trip. They had a long road trip right before the holidays. And they won 1 game among Milwaukee and Indiana, Philly, Toronto. They played the Knicks and Nets on back-to-back games, lost them both. They were 15-18, and that was the lowest point that the Warriors were that late in the season. They ended up working their way back to at over 500 right around New Year's, and they were either basically 2 games over, 2 games over, 2 games under, all the way until March, and then made the little push at the very end of the season to end up 6 games over, which was their high water mark. What I'm getting at here, Greg, is it feels like last year in terms of the record. It feels like last year in terms of the vibes. It feels like last year in terms of, to use your term, fragility to keep it on track. Like the Warriors all year last year were teetering on a breaking point that never came. I think they're teetering on a breaking point right now, and they're not going to have Draymond Green, and things really, despite the 30-point game that Klay had against the Clippers, it's not getting better for him on a consistent basis. Andrew Wiggins goes to the bench and is still, maybe he played harder, but he didn't play better than he had been playing against the Clippers. So you've got young players getting opportunities, and that's nice. but it's also not enough to really matter in terms of wins and losses. And then when you start, I think at that point, everything starts to creep in as far as the big picture. You've got Steph kicking chairs. You've got who knows when Draymond's coming back. Who knows when Klay Thompson's going to be pissed off again. Like, it's just, there's just a lot going on here surrounding this team. And unfortunately, they're closer to the bottom of the Western Conference right now than they are to being a top 4 team, which is another thing that this team's going to have to deal with moving forward.
I mean, if we're going to compare it to last year, there are things that are similar and there are things that are different, of course. But the big similarity is what you just alluded to, JD, in that they're always floating around 500 and they're teetering on this breaking point that never really came. What it is exhausting. And I think we can all say that as people who are just following the team and keeping up with the team. I can't imagine being the ones who have to go out there and play and then be under the spotlight and then have to answer the same questions over and over and over and over again when it feels like you kind of got over a hurdle that you had last year and it came right back to haunt you. And now they're 4 games under 500. They need many, many things to go right. And you can spin it in 2 different ways. There's the way of they're actually not that far off on a lot of these games. I think they lost by a combined 7 points in those 4 road games.
You know what, I'm gonna jump in real quick. I'm not gonna.
Yeah.
The one thing I will say on that, and because I'm already hearing it, and you're not wrong for saying it, but you know what my first thought is when you start to go down that road about close games and everything, I start thinking to myself, Greg, this is what bad teams say. This is what, like, bad teams are always.
You're absolutely right. You're absolutely right.
A play away, or if this doesn't happen, or if that player wasn't out, or if and that's what bad teams say. Bad teams also rearrange the deck chairs and change their starting lineup all the time and bench, veteran players that aren't playing well for younger players, and maybe that gets the fans excited. But it becomes, in a lot of ways, a different version of the same. And I feel like the Warriors right now, in a bunch of different ways, are a different version of the same.
No, absolutely. And I'm so glad you jumped in, because that's exactly where I was going with, well, that's one way you can spin it. But the other way you can spin it is you're not closing games, whether you have a lead or whether you're trying to fight your way back and come back. Do you want to guess what the average margin for the Warriors through 3 quarters is?
Okay. The average margin through 3 quarters, I would guess the Warriors are probably, I don't know, +6, plus 6, 7.
It's only plus 1.2, but for a team that's 10-4 to be in the positive still says something. The 4th quarter, they are finding ways to not get it done. And over the course of this core and this dynasty, we have seen the Warriors win so many games that they had no business winning and no business even making a contest again. So they went from the team that you couldn't kill now to the team that can't put anybody away. And I think for a lot of fans and followers, that is a huge shock of a transition.
What's the 4th quarter? Because I'm usually pretty good at math, but yeah, that was an overshoot. There's no way they'd have to be a lot worse in 4th quarters to make up for being that high. So what's the if they're, you said they're what in the first 3 quarters they're plus what? They're plus
they are
1
plus 1.2. And
plus,
then,
so they're basically minus 1.2 in the other quarter.
It's actually 0.9. So I don't know exactly how it all worked out, but that is 22nd in the league.
Gotcha. I was looking at them as being an even, like, just after last night, I was looking at them having an even point differential. At one, basically 115.5, 115.5. But regardless, we can go through the games, and I mean, just recently here on the road, the Sacramento game, the first Clippers game, the game in Oklahoma City. I mean, the Warriors have just missed out. They lose the home game to Oklahoma City when Holmgren hits the 3, and then they go into overtime, and Shai Gilgeous-Alexander puts them away. Really, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander's put them away in 2 overtimes on the Holmgren games where they've messed up the foul in 2 different ways. So you're not ever going to win all of the close games. My general rule is And again, I hate going down this road, Greg, because again, this is another one of the things that like bad teams do, and fans of bad teams do, and the media that covers bad teams that they do, is they start saying, well, all these games, they should have won 6 games, they should have won 10 games. I usually will take that number and divide it by 2, and that's the number where I'll give. So if you want to say 6, if you want to say there's been 5 or 6. I would say, okay, well, that really means there's probably been 3, because the Warriors weren't going to go 6-0. And if they did go 6-0, that would be an outlier the other way. That isn't a true indicator of really the team that they are. I think, a decent example of that last year, and this is not shade to my friends in my hometown of Sacramento. The Kings' record last year was a little bit skewed by their propensity to win close games. They didn't lose a single game that was decided by 1 point in the first game. The Kings last year won every single 1 point game until game 4, when Harrison Barnes missed the 3 that would have beat the Warriors to put it. That was the first time all year that Sacramento lost a 1 point game.
And did they lose any overtime games? I know at one point they hadn't. I don't know if it ended up happening.
Yeah, no, I want to say they maybe did to Minnesota at one point.
Yeah, that sounds right.
I want to say maybe they did, but anyway, it's neither here nor there. Teams can have their records be a little bit inflated because of the propensity to win close games, or deflated based on the fact that you're losing the close games. And so the point that I was originally making is, if you're gonna claim 6 or 8 games, really divide it by 2. So for the purposes of this conversation, let's say it's 6 games that you think the Warriors should have won, right? They go into that should have won. Well, even if it's 3, if you do the divide by 2 exercise, we're talking about a team that's 13-11 instead of 10-14. And that's the difference between being on the outside looking in and being, let's say, tied for 9th or 10th in the play-in tournament. And look, if the Warriors were 13-11 right now, we'd be having a completely different conversation. Maybe we wouldn't be calling them title contenders, but it would be, all right, they're treading water through some adversity until they can get whole again, and then they'll push forward, right? Or at least that's the goal.
Right.
Now it's just, how the hell can this team get back to 500 as quickly as possible and then get everybody back? And then, so it really is a mess that they've created with their poor play. And I'm not sure how they find their way out of it in short order. The other thing, when you get into the fragility, you're one injury away from being in a bad, like, what if you get to 10-14 and then, like happened last year at this time, Steph Curry has to miss a month or 4 weeks. I think he basically missed exactly 4 weeks. If Steph Curry had to miss 4 weeks right now, I mean, I shudder to think. I mean, if Steph Curry had to miss 4 weeks right now, I mean, what are we talking about? Packing it in for this Warriors team? I mean, that's the position you paint yourself in when you don't maximize being relatively healthy and you can't finish these close games and you're forced to make all these lineup changes and adjustments.
Yeah, and speaking of health, there was a Suns game they just had with no Kevin Durant, and last night Clippers with no Paul George. So, yeah, Draymond Green was missing, at least for last night and, the last quarter and a half of the Suns game. But you have to take advantage of opportunities that are in front of you. And I always say that about teams with championship aspirations. And I think this is, looking back now, other people might start appreciating it a little bit more. But I think that in 2022, the fact that the Warriors were able to win a title after all they went through between 2019 and 2022, not just become a good team again, but win a title, was so incredibly rare and ridiculous. And we're seeing now that you need a lot of things to go right and break your way. And the Warriors have not had a lot of things break their way. And that's not me making an excuse for them, but it just goes to show that they've always had flaws that they could cover up. The turnovers, especially, I don't think they've ever not been in the bottom third under Steve Kerr. And it makes sense. They play faster. They have more passes. It's going to happen.
Yeah,
but
it's
they
just
don't
be
have that same
22nd
margin
and
for
not
error.
30th. Be
Yes.
22nd and not 30th, and you're probably okay as long as you're playing well in other areas.
Yeah, no, you're you're absolutely right.
All right, it's our Just Dubs podcast for KNBR, the sports leader. It's John Dickinson, joined by Greg Silver. This is the debut edition of this podcast, and it's going to morph its way into a radio show, which is going to start, for those of you that have followed me along the years in my previous life, as I like to say, my previous radio life. A lot of success doing a Saturday show in another place. And so we're bringing it to the sports leader in the beginning of 2024. Couldn't be more excited about it. That program is going to be called Just Dubs. And this podcast is equally, they're both under the Just Dubs header. So the ability to go live and do a podcast on any off night or afternoon or anytime there's breaking news, we're going to have the ability to do that. Love having Greg alongside for this. Greg's doing an unbelievable job behind the scenes, producing and engineering the Dubs OT shows that you hear following each and every Warriors game. And so, yeah, he gets an opportunity to crack the mic and get his mug on the screen a little bit. And as we chop it up and talk Warriors basketball for KNBR, the sports leader, and couldn't be happier. So, yeah, we're going to be dropping these at least once a week. And that's at least once a week in addition to the Saturday show, which is going to debut coming up at some point in early January. So really looking forward to that. A lot of different things to get into, just kind of setting the table really here for the last 25 minutes or so as far as this Warrior season and where things got off the rails and how they get it back. Because, the one thing that can't happen is some kind of injury to Steph Curry. So we don't even, let's not even go down that road because, I mean, it's not we'll cross that bridge when we get to it. It's we'll jump off that bridge when we get to it. If it comes to that point. But Steve Kerr has made some changes. I do think we need to get into Draymond Green a little bit more in depth as well, because the whole tenor of this suspension and the indefinite nature and really the tone about just the way it's been discussed has been really less disciplinary sounding and more personal mental health. Get a guy right, get a guy the help that he needs to change his life. Really more of a support type of a deal, and that's come from the league office and from the Warriors, and apparently even reportedly from Draymond's camp as the three all kind of got together and determined how things were going to be set up for this. So it's interesting because I think we were all looking for the disciplinary component to the suspension and how long it was going to be. And really the whole tone of it has been more about reflection and personal improvement. And we obviously haven't heard from Draymond since the night of the incident when he apologized. And who knows, maybe it hasn't, Draymond has been pretty defiant to changing the things that have made him successful. And he's been really blunt in saying so over the years. Maybe this incident, I'll believe it when I see it and it's on him to prove it, but maybe this incident did change a little bit of his tone, which has allowed the whole overarching tone to change with respect to, yes, you're out and you're out indefinitely, and it's going to be significant, probably at least 10 games or more, but you're going to get the help you need from all these different angles to where this is hopefully the last time we're ever talking about Draymond being in this type of a position, at least as frequently as he's been in this type of position.
I mean, what's so alarming, and, we've had so many great people give their insights on this. The Murph and Marcus show took some great callers who had interesting perspectives. One of them was had some military trauma and went to anger management and talked about that experience. And we don't know if Draymond Green is specifically going to anger management. This podcast is not here to psychoanalyze him or speculate on anything that we don't know. But we've heard a lot of different perspectives.
I'll say this: I have heard without specifics that was a step that privately he would had been going through. Just a quick little tip in on that. Not something that I think was necessarily wanted to be gotten into great detail about, but my understanding was that had been a step. So maybe it's a different type of a program or more enhanced or taken more seriously or whatever it is. But I do think some level of counseling and talking to somebody is probably the best way to outside of sports and outside of maybe your family had been going on with Draymond.
Yeah, and there were two perspectives that we heard yesterday, both of which kind of made me think a little bit. One, of course, was Steve Kerr before the game, and we played some of that sound last night on Dubs OT, where he said that the Draymond of the last year and a half is not the same Draymond that people labeled as a dirty player in the other decade of his career, where he had the high step on LeBron that got him suspended, or arguing with the referees and playing with a lot of emotional fervor and passion. Punching Jordan Poole, stomping on Sabonis, slapping Yusuf Nurkic on, while trying to sell a foul, and then choking Rudy Gobert. Those were all incidents a little bit more extreme and violent than you'd ever want to see on a basketball court. But then we also had our good friend Adam Copeland talk about Draymond Green on the Tolbert and Cope show yesterday. And he was a little bit more sympathetic to Draymond and kind of standing up for him in the sense of, he doesn't understand what the big "this brother needs help" label that is going around, in the sense that he is a father, he is a husband, he has not ever been arrested, he hasn't been showing up with substance abuse or any common problems that you might think of outside of basketball, and was kind of just making the argument that, yes, maybe it's a little excessive by the standard of a game of basketball, what he is doing, but I think now there's been a little bit of a talk that's kind of blown up as Draymond being kind of this severely ill person that needs some help. And I think it's good that he's going to get the work to try to figure out how to, channel some of his basketball emotion in a better way on the court. But what do you make of that Adam Copeland bit about maybe this Draymond thing being blown up a little bit too much just because a lot of people root for a basketball team?
Well, look, I think, first of all, the things that Cope said about, his character in the manner of, family man and father and those kinds. I mean, all of that is true. I mean, that, he hasn't had problems, in those areas or anything like that. But the one thing I will say is, just because it hasn't necessarily become public doesn't mean that there aren't issues that may certainly don't broach the illegal category or anything like that. I'm not going down that road, but everybody has things that they're going through that they need to deal with to become better people or to be more effective in their work environment. And so I do think there had to be some kind of a different tone. I mean, I think the whole harsh disciplinary tone thing wasn't working. So I do feel like, whether it was a concoction of the league and Draymond and the team to try and have this thing take on a little bit of a different sentiment, I do think it's, I'd rather have that be the conversation, honestly. And again, it doesn't mean that he's some evil person or anything like that. It doesn't mean that he's a criminal or like nobody's saying that. But to acknowledge that there are some things maybe in his personal life that have bled over into his basketball life and impacted him to where he just carries himself in a less controlled manner. I think that's, I don't know. I think that's a better tone to this thing than just, I'm Draymond, I'm always going to be Draymond, nobody can stop me from being Draymond, it's the reason I've been successful, and I ain't changing for anybody, like, and punish me, and then we'll all argue about whether I was punished too much or not. And, so I don't know. I think that this tone, I don't want to call it softer, but it feels a little more human. There feels like there's a little more human element to it, as opposed to basketball player breaks the rule and needs to be punished. Like that part of it is, and look, I mean, he's done some things where that's needed to happen, but to at least start having a conversation about if there are other things going on in his life that maybe are causing some of this. I mean, I don't know. I don't think that's a bad thing, because the way that it's been discussed before hasn't worked. So if this leads down the path of working, then great. And that's, that's what is needed, because here's the deal. The Warriors still need Draymond Green. Steve Kerr has said it. Mike Dunleavy Jr. said it at the press conference that he had, the availability in LA, when the day after suspension went down, and he said it. Draymond's been fine when he's played. He just has had too many instances where he hasn't made himself available, and that's what's hurt the team. Like his problem is not the Klay Thompson or the Andrew Wiggins problem. His problem is that he can't be on the court consistently enough, because he keeps doing these things that take him away from his teammates and let the team down. So finding that balance of, and I don't want to oversimplify it. I don't know that it's just anger management. I don't know if there's something else going on in his personal life, whether it's a family issue, and it's none of our business, whether it's a, alcohol issue or whatever it is. Again, and I'm not saying that's what it is or reporting that that's what it is, because I don't know that that's what it is, but I'm just run through the different issues that somebody may have. If it is one of those things, then, by all means, try to tackle it and try to overcome it and try to use that to become a better person, and thus a better teammate and player.
Yeah, I mean, I like what you said about it being a little bit more of a human approach, because agree with it or not, like Draymond or not, we can all kind of come to a consensus here that whatever has been done to discipline Draymond in the past clearly has not changed anything. And the fact that he had 2 instances of such severity in a really short time crunch is not good. I mean, you were almost working here at KNBR when he was choking Rudy Gobert, JD, and then we got through 4 Dubs OT shows by the time he slapped Yusuf Nurkic on trying to sell the foul. So yes, it feels like it's been a long season already, but this is it's happened quickly, and I think you see the NBA in general too, the way they will crack down on a second time or repeat offenses, because people love to point to the Ja Morant suspension from last year that he's serving right now. And it's not that Ja Morant did something illegal in possessing a gun and flashing it on Instagram Live. It's that he was caught for it. He had to meet with the NBA, serve a mini suspension. They clearly were not about that, with him being, a big brand of the future of the league. And then not that long after, he's doing it again online. And so it's not that he broke the law. It's not that he did something violent with that gun, but it's, hey, you need to understand what we are asking from you and the standards that we have set. I think Adam Silver, by and large, has done a really good job as the commissioner of the league in terms of putting the hammer down. Like, let's not forget that he banned Donald Sterling for life when he was like a couple of months on the job. I mean, that was a pretty big start to his tenure. But yeah, that's kind of where I stand with the Draymond thing. And I agree that taking a different approach might perhaps help him in some way. And I don't know when we're going to see him next for the Warriors, and what this team's record is going to be at the time, and if it's going to be too late to turn it around.
Yeah, and look, Mike Dunleavy Jr. said they're committed to him. I mean, they just signed him to a 4-year contract. So, I mean, he's not going anywhere per se. I mean, at this point, and look, I don't think, from a basketball standpoint, when you look around the roster, he's in many ways the least of the problems from a basketball standpoint. So I think, and Steph, obviously, Steph Curry wanted him to be back, as he wanted all of these guys to come back. And so maybe that's where we go next. because Steph, he's kicking chairs. I thought he said all the right things as far as Draymond, very much in line with what Mike Dunleavy Jr. said, what Joe Dumars from the league office said, what Steve Kerr had said in the aftermath of the indefinite suspension announcement. And so, but Steph's been frustrated. And the thing that I've wondered about Steph lately, Greg, is he coming to the realization that what he wanted in the summer, this reunion of Coach Kerr, and they wanted Bob Myers back, although Bob decided to leave. But this reunion of Steve Kerr along with Clay and Draymond for one more year, and re-signing Draymond for 3 more beyond this year, because that's what needed to be done to keep him around. Does Steph Curry regret it right now, I guess, is the question? Or is Steph Curry content? And I sensed a little acceptance in some of the cuts we played last night on the Dubs OT show. A little bit of acceptance in that this isn't going to necessarily, like, maybe he understands, all right, this team might not be a title contender, but I'm going to have to just roll with the guys we've got and try to bring the young guys along. And then we reevaluate coming up in 25 games, or reevaluate in the offseason again, and make some of the more dramatic decisions that may have to be made. I guess he's trying not to panic. And I feel like everybody with the Warriors right now is really trying to will positivity into existence by just speaking about it constantly. But I don't know, where do you think Steph's at right now? Because he is as impactful and important a decision maker in all of this as Joe Lacob or Bob Myers when he was still around, or Mike Dunleavy Jr. or Steve Kerr. Steph carries that weight as the player that really is at the forefront for everything turning around for this Warriors organization.
Absolutely. This is a heavy and multi-layered question that you just put out for me, but I've spent a lot of time thinking about the Steph element of it, because he is the most influential person in that building. By all accounts, everybody loves him on the court as well as off the court. And as far as superstars go in the NBA, he's not going to be overly demanding besides one thing, which is the ability to want to compete for championships. That's kind of always been who Steph Curry is throughout his entire career. As far as if he regrets the decisions, I think regret is a strong word, and I'm not going to put that label on where Steph Curry is at. But is he content? No. How could you be content if you have the competitive fire of someone like a Steph Curry? I know he can say all the right things in the media sometimes and kind of be a little bit boring, as superstars are coached to be, when you're just kind of speaking to reporter after reporter or people around the game of basketball. But the dude's a killer inside. There is no question about it. The babyface assassin is what they call him, and for good reason. He cannot be content with what's going on. However, the Warriors, I think, are stuck with what they are, at least for this season. Could they make a trade at the deadline? Sure, but let's be realistic about this. You kind of kill the 2-track plan with Jordan Poole and trading him away. You get rid of James Wiseman last year, and now you still got Kuminga and Moody that you're holding on to, and they've shown some nice flashes. Podziemski seems to be like a really good draft pick. Trace Jackson-Davis, we'll see. Still very early on. What is the trade value of Klay Thompson right now, who had 2 of the worst injuries possible and is getting up there in age? What is the trade value of Andrew Wiggins, who has gone from all-star starter to can't even have him on the court in important moments? And what is the trade value of a Draymond Green, who is hurting his own team more than he is helping them at the moment? So it's so easy for fans to go, oh, trade this, trade that. Chris Paul, you can get rid of that contract after this year, but I think you're stuck with him for the year.
You could get rid of Chris. Look, I don't think they're looking at Klay Thompson or Draymond Green right now. And I don't think they're looking at Draymond Green at all after they had just signed him to the deal that they signed him to. I think that's why they came out so adamantly supportive of him and not combative. I mean, I think that, you come out combative when you still have 3.5+ years on a contract, and things can get, pretty screwy pretty quickly. So I think you're not looking at the big three. To me, what it boils down to is Chris Paul and Andrew Wiggins. And I hear you. Chris Paul's value is the $30 million that you can take back in a trade, and then the team that acquires him can waive him for $0 in the offseason. So that is a chip that can be played at any point. That can be played in February before the deadline on February 8th. That can be played in the offseason as well, because it does have that date where you could trade him basically, and then the other team can waive him, and the $30 million will come off the books. The question, though, is, do the Warriors want to take back a $30 million player that maybe has more years left on the deal, as opposed to just saving the money? Now, just saving the money gets you under luxury tax aprons and all that, but just saving the money doesn't mean you have that money to spend anymore. And the Warriors have, because of their cap and the luxury tax and all of that. So your only chance to use that $30 million, if you want to, and you feel you could afford to, it makes financial sense to do it as an organization, is by trading Chris Paul for another player, or for a group of players that add up to within enough of, where the contract has to be, as far as the $30 million that it used to be, I think within 10%. I think that number's changed a little bit with the new collective bargaining agreement, but it doesn't have to be 30 for 30, but it's got to be, I think, within 20, somebody within 26 to about 32 or $33 million. So in order to make that work. So I think you look at that. And again, I think the next 15 to 20 games determine it. I think you look at Wiggins, not a lot of, but it's not those two players that you're going to get anything for. And here's the thing. I was doing the show with Greg Papa today on the Sports Leader. I was sitting in for Lund, and it's not Chris Paul and his contract or Andrew Wiggins. It's, do you start looking to attach those two to some of the younger players to bring in veteran players or more prime veteran players that are better fits around the big three to try and help hold them up? That's what it becomes. And I don't know what I don't know that, because of the value of those players that I just mentioned, that it's not just Chris Paul and it's not just Wiggins. It's, right. Is Kuminga attached to one of them? Is Moody and Podziemski attached to a couple of them? Do you look at it? That's the thought. Does Looney put in somewhere? Does GP2, who they love, obviously? It's, do you really get creative in that way to change the complexion of your team moving forward? And that's where I think, the fixes come in terms of how much do you believe in what we've seen recently from some of the younger players. And also, and this is where the Warriors have to figure it out, Greg, how do they evaluate and assess the ceiling of those players? Like, it's one thing to say, hey, Kuminga the last 3 or 4 games has been a really good role player, right? Like, but for the most part, he's been inconsistent when he's been asked to do that. That's one part.
Defensively.
So you have to, exactly. So you have to, Kuminga in a lot of ways has been one-dimensional. He's been scoring and attacking the basket, but defensively struggling. And even so, in some ways, defensively struggling more than he's ever struggled, actually. Like you can almost make the case Kuminga's defense is getting worse as he's getting older in his career, which is obviously not a good thing. But that's not the point of where I'm going with this. Yeah. The point is, Kuminga's played pretty well of late. Yeah. And Kerr's put him in the starting lineup. Moody's been who Moody is, solid, steady. Podziemski has brought an infusion of hustle and rebounding and ball movement. And, a lot of nights he's made shots. He didn't make shots against the Clippers, but that was an off night. No big deal. The question, though, is, are you good enough if you keep those guys around to be role players in other areas, versus do you think hanging on to them for the next 2 or 3 years means you've got a core, or are those guys at best all just going to be role players? And if they're all just going to be role players, then I think, and again, this is what the Warriors have to figure out, if they're all just going to be role players, then why wouldn't you put them in deals to try and bring back better than that attached to some of the other veterans. It's a tricky calculus, Greg, but I think that is what the Warriors have to manage here, because the one thing you don't want to do is end up with, we're going to hang on to Kuminga and we're going to hang on to Moody and we're going to hang on to Podziemski, and none of them are ever all-stars and, or superstars. And then, and that's great. You can like them all, but if the rest of your team isn't good enough to have them function as role players and you don't project them becoming all-stars or superstars, then at that point, don't you have to look to maybe move on from them and try and get an infusion of other players in, even though you'd like, but you have to make that decision before you let it play out too far. Otherwise their value isn't worth. So it's a conundrum. But it's I think a big part of what Mike Dunleavy Jr. is going to have to evaluate here in these next 15, 20 games, and many of them, if not all of them, without Draymond Green.
No, you took the words right out of my mouth. That 15 to 20 games is way shorter than what you can evaluate of what Moody, Kuminga, and Podziemski could be for your franchise. But 15 to 20 games is going to tell us a lot about the urgency levels of this franchise, and we might have teetered over that breaking point line in the next 15 to 20 games.
I think it's possible. And I think the other part is, like, let's say you don't, like, I'll just ask you, because I have an answer on this, and this is the kind of thing that can get you in trouble down the line. But do you think right now that Kuminga, Moody, or Podziemski, either of the three, are going to be superstars?
I think they could be all-stars. I think superstars, that's probably not, because that's such a rare thing in the NBA.
Yeah, I think at this point, I mean, I could see Podziemski being an all-star down the line. I don't see Moody being an all-star. And Moody's probably the one among the three that I like the most, to be honest. But I don't see him being an all-star or a superstar. I think Kuminga definitely could be an all-star. Yeah. I don't know about a superstar. I mean, I would have said a year ago, even maybe a superstar. I think the more we see him, the more all-star might be his cap. But I don't want to totally say that, because I do think he has room to grow and continue to grow. But so I think those answers make it a little more difficult to evaluate what to do if you're the Warriors, because let's say you do believe Kuminga can be a superstar in 2026. Well, where's Steph Curry at that point? And is Kuminga, Moody, and Podziemski going to be, let's say Kuminga's a superstar, is Kuminga, Moody, and Podziemski 3 years from now going to be, what? Even if Kuminga is a superstar and the other two, and Podziemski's really good and Moody's still steady, I mean, what is that at that point? That, and again, it's you got to tell me who the other 10 players are and how good they are to really have an idea. So they on their own are not going to be enough to where you feel great about the franchise. And that's even betting on the high end of a guy like Kuminga. Is Kuminga going to be able to be an all-star with Steph still being a superstar? Probably not, right?
Yeah.
Probably not.
Looking like it'd be tough. Looking like it'd be tough right now.
Probably not. And again, that's really no shade at Kuminga, who still, if Draymond's going to be around, Kuminga's not a 3. And I keep thinking the Warriors do not think of Kuminga as a 3. They think of Kuminga as a 4. If you look at the lineups where Kuminga's out there, he's always out there with, Moody and Clay and Podziemski and, or Moody and Clay and Steph, or, another 3. Podziemski's out there with Chris Paul and Clay, or, usually a point guard, Podziemski, and a guard that moves up to play the 3 or what. Again, he's the 4 basically in all of these lineups. Saric is playing with him, or Draymond's playing with him, or Kevon Looney's playing with him, like is the case in the I mean, look at the starting lineup that they used. Steph, Pajemski at the 2, Clay shifts up to play the 3, Kuminga's at the 4, Kevon Looney's playing the 5. So if Draymond's going to be around, then like, are they going to play a center because everybody thinks they need size? Are they going to play a center and Draymond and Kuminga at the 3? Like, there's just no way they're going to do that. So, I think a lot of times fans think of it as, well, Kuminga's going to take Wiggins' spot and he's already better, damn it. Well, he doesn't even really play the same position. Although Wiggins does play some 4, obviously, when the Warriors do go small. But when they play the same position, it's Wiggins playing the 4, not Kuminga playing the 3.
Yeah, and I've said many times this year that a good Andrew Wiggins is for sure a better player than Jonathan Kuminga. And the issue is that the good Andrew Wiggins has shown up 2 to 3 times this year.
Exactly.
Like an alarmingly low number.
Yeah. And unfortunately for the Warriors, they lost the game where he went for 30 against OKC. And then they lost the game where Clay had his best game of the year to the Clippers because they couldn't defend. And so, again, these are all things that we'll continue to get into over the course of the season here on the Just Dubs podcast and the Just Dubs radio show, which is going to be each and every Saturday on KNBR, the sports leader, in the morning. And again, multi-platform. We're going to be streaming it. We're going to be podcasting it. We're going to be taking phone calls at 808 KNBR. Couldn't be more thrilled. And so a lot of these different things as we start looking at the Warriors and they move forward. And look, it can all change with 1 8-game winning streak or 10 out of 13 or whatever it is. And the schedule does get easier.
This is the conversation we got to have right now.
But to set the table for everything, I mean, there does need to be a reality check because the things that have gone, it's not fine. It's not nothing, and it's not fine. And so the Warriors are going to have to find their way through it. I do think they're going to have a ton of home games coming up, a ton of them in the end of December and the first half of January. And again, probably without Draymond for a good majority of that. And then beyond that, it's going to be let the chips fall where they may, and let's see where they are. So all in all, good start to the Just Dubs era. Great stuff, Greg. Appreciate it, man. And appreciate all the work you're doing behind the scenes on the other show.
Absolutely.
I'm really excited about this opportunity to be working with you and doing this thing.
Oh, it means a lot from someone who's been a Bay Area radio legend, and now I get to share a lot of work with. And look, let's be honest, we've had a crazy couple of weeks, but I'm really thrilled with the way that we've gotten things up and building, and even just getting this podcast up before the show officially gets going for Just Dubs on Saturday mornings. I really can't thank you enough. And, big thank you to Adam Copeland too. And everyone who's been just making all this stuff happen. And I mean, look, the Warriors, it's messy right now, but the fact that we get to ramp up this coverage and have these conversations, it's, like I said at the beginning of the show, it is quite the chapter in Golden State Warriors history.
Without a doubt. So for Greg Silver, I'm John Dickinson. Appreciate the help of Adam Copeland, as you mentioned. Mari, among the digital folks, has just been tremendous, along with Jake Montero, along with Michael Connell. A lot of really, really good people that are helping us do this at KNBR, the sports leader. So really appreciate it. One episode in the books. We'll crank out another one at some point next week. The schedule's going to get busy. We're going to have to figure out time to do it. Warriors games coming fast and furious. They're going to play Brooklyn. They're going to play Portland. I'm going to Arizona for the Niners on Sunday. And then going to be, how about this one? I'm going to be doing, maybe I shouldn't say where I'm going to be doing Dubs OT on Sunday. Actually, they might kick me out. They might kick me out.
No, we're going to leave that a secret.
I may or may not be doing Dubs OT from State Farm Stadium in Glendale, Arizona, home of multiple Super Bowls and the Final Four and the national championship game in college football, and Dubs OT on KNBR, the sports leader. All the big events come to State Farm Stadium in Glendale, Arizona. So for Greg, I'm JD. We'll talk to you next week. KNBR, the sports leader.